Over 2 years after the release, I finally got NieR Automata. I say got, but it's actually more like borrowed from my library. I really enjoy playing this game. It's got fluid controls, the graphics look really nice, and there's an interesting art style. It's like an action-focused RPG that has beat-em-up elements, or those are the main elements of the gameplay, but the game sometimes shifts to both 2D and 3D style shooting gameplay. I really like that. I haven't really played many or any modern games that do this. I like the freedom of being able to run around in different areas, and I think the game is pretty flexible in terms of playing style. There's many interesting things you can customize in terms of abilities and even the head-up display. So that means you can battle from afar or up close or anywhere in between. Whatever suits you. And the story was a pleasant surprise. I was expecting some sort of cliché RPG-like story, but it turned out being much more interesting than I thought. I haven't played NieR Automata for any great length, so this isn't like a full-on review, but there are a bunch of things I want to talk about that I found really cool, and there's also a bit of criticism here and there. Even though I really like NieR Automata, this is one of those games that barely registered on my radar when it first came out. I saw the cover and the name, and it just didn't really catch my attention. Also, it's a Japanese game that has a very strong anime-style look that somehow managed to get good reviews by IGN and other review places, so I figured there had to be something wrong with this game. But, as you can imagine, I have seen images of 2B's immense proportions, so I thought, well, perhaps I should check it out. So I opened another tab and looked up some gameplay footage. I saw the hack and slash combat and thought, hey, that looks pretty fun. I knew that my local library had a few PS4 copies, so I went over and borrowed one of them. And man, I'm glad I did. There's so much more to this game than I first imagined. I actually don't want to continue playing the PS4 game because I want to buy the PC version and play that instead. Things get interesting right at the beginning with the tutorial, since it throws you right into the action. No dilly-dallying, just get in there. I was surprised to see something resembling a vertically scrolling shooter, and then it turned into Ikari basically, and then a horizontal shooter, and then it became 3D. I thought that was really cool how it switched around. But it transitions between the different gameplay segments smoothly. You don't have to relearn the controls because they're pretty much the same thing no matter what's going on, which is kind of amazing. You can still shoot in the hack and slash segments, which I really like because it's nice being able to consistently shoot from afar and keep your distance at times. For the most part, you play the game 3D hack and slash style, just in case you're wondering. The tutorial is about 40-ish minutes long. For the most part, you're playing, with only a few cutscenes interrupting things here and there. Once that's over, you get a brief on the story. NieR Automata is not the first game of the series. This is the second game in the NieR series, which itself is a Drakengard spin-off. Apparently it's quite complicated. I watched a video called What You Missed from NieR, which shows how convoluted everything is. But you don't need to have played the original NieR game to enjoy NieR Automata. So the premise is this. Humanity is displaced from Earth to the moon due to aliens invading with a machine army. The humans want to fight back and regain control of their planet, but instead of fighting themselves, they create androids who fight for them. So both sides use synthetically created beings, let's call them that, to do the fighting. You control 2B, at least for certain parts of the game, who is one of those androids. So as you can tell, they don't really have names, but more like numbers and letters. As you probably gathered by now, the theme is whether machines or androids can be considered life forms or not. Obviously, this is a somewhat common theme, but I think NieR Automata approaches the subject in a really interesting way. The fact that you're playing an android is like deeply seated into the gameplay. And it's interesting that even after just a couple of hours, there are several situations where you have to decide what actions to take in morally dubious situations. Let's talk about gameplay for a bit. There's a few specific things I want to talk about here. I already mentioned the various genres of gameplay this game likes to scroll through, but I want to specifically mention how flexible the game is when it comes to allowing different play styles. Just the fact that you can shoot is already great. In boss fights, that really doesn't deal that much damage, but I like how it allows you to be a bit more cautious and defensive with your approach. Even if it takes a while, you can beat a boss that way. just because you're always continuously adding a bit of damage, or doing a bit of damage. Another thing that is really great are the chips. They're like this game's equivalent of how enchantments and armor work in other games. Except instead of having limited slots for items, it's a bit more computer-themed, and also flexible. Plug-in chips all require a specific amount of processing power, which you have limited amount of, even though you can get more later on. The amount of processing power required depends on the effect and also how strong it is. Some of them are like really basic, like you get a certain percentage of health, or maybe your range is a bit more when it comes to your attacks or whatever. There's a lot of room to customize what you want. For example, for me in the early game, I added chips that add a shockwave attack to my sword, so I can deal damage from far away, and also some health regen benefits, like regaining a certain percentage of damage dealt to an opponent. That way I don't always need to use items to heal all the time. There's a lot of different types of effects. Some are like health related, they add a certain percentage of health, and others give you a certain ability. But what's really cool is that you can also remove abilities you don't need to make space for other chips that require more capacity. So for example, I can even get rid of the HUD elements or some of the behavior, like how they sometimes go away when you don't need them. Like that's a chip that you can just take out. I mean, it doesn't use up that much space, but you can just take it out and every little bit counts, right? Removing HUD elements may make certain things a bit less convenient, but hey, if my evade range goes up, I think that's a fair trade. It reminds me a bit of how in, let's say, Valkyria Chronicles for the tanks, you have this grid of blocks, with each block being a certain part that enhances a certain effect. Except with NieR Automata, you don't need to be good at Tetris. There's multiple sets you can compile, so you can essentially switch between playing styles whenever you want. Something similar exists with weapons too, though as you can imagine that's a bit more simple. And the way everything's laid out is, I think, easy to understand. Better than many fantasy-style RPGs in my opinion. When you die, you have to collect your old body, or else all your chips will go away, which I think is a really good penalty for dying. It's not too frustrating, but at the same time, it's a good incentive to be a bit more careful. The whole theme of the story also comes through with when your character, quote, dies. Because when you go back to your old body, you think of that body as that being you, or the character, I guess. But then that consciousness being transferred to another body, I don't know, it just kind of makes you think. The music is a highlight of this game. Boss fights especially can get really exciting because of it, and the gentle passages when just roaming around makes things really immersive. Speaking of boss fights, I'm really not into boss fights at all normally. I usually don't find them all that fun, but I do enjoy them in NieR Automata. There's a theatrical and grandiose quality there that I enjoy. The game likes to play a lot with light, so often you get ominous shadows and interesting moods. Some of the imagery throughout the game is, I guess the best word to use here is grotesque. Slightly off-putting, but intriguing is the sort of feeling I'm getting. The controls are, in my opinion, decent. They're easy to learn, but I think the controller is a bit of a limiting factor. It's difficult, at least for me, to use a healing item while still performing all my other actions. In order to heal, I need to hit the down button, which means I can't move since my thumb isn't on the stick. And then I can't move the camera because I have to hit a face button to activate the healing item. There are instances where I want to heal while I also move the character, move the camera, and shoot while evading an enemy. Sometimes I can manage some finger acrobatics to do multiple things at the same time, but I feel keyboard and mouse controls would be much more natural for me. It is possible to remap the controller buttons though, but at this point I'm already getting used to it. Controllers are not my native gaming environment, so it would be harder for me to relearn the layout, but honestly, that's a relatively small complaint. There's so much to talk about with this game that I haven't even mentioned yet, even though I've only played for around, 4 hours? I decided to save the best for last, so here it is. You can self-destruct if you hold down the left and right analog stick. You can deal huge damage to everything around you that way, but you're left with basically no health, and you can be one-shot killed. But that's how you get rid of 2B's skirt/cape thing. Is the use of healing items worth it? Of course it is. But sadly, going into the transporter resets the outfit. A transporter is a device that allows you to save and fast travel, by the way. Also, if you have the camera at a low angle, 2B will shoo away the camera, which I think is pretty funny. I think what I'm going to do now is wait for a Steam sale and get the game of the Yorha edition. I really want to play it on PC, even though it looks good on a PS4 and even runs at 60 FPS most of the time. I want the game of the Yorha edition because it includes all the DLC, including outfits, which I want obviously. If you played the game, I'd like to hear your comments about it. I'm not too fussed about spoilers since I've already read about things, but be mindful and mark spoilers for the benefit of others in the comment section who do care about spoilers. I hope you enjoyed this quick overview of the game. Remember to like the video if you did, check out Patreon if you want to help out the channel, and get some benefits while doing so. And don't forget about the second channel either. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.